Hi everyone. Total transparency. That video part 1 took me a lot of time to make. A lot of pasting, editing, cutting together. And so for this part 2, I'm going to try to do it a little bit more live, a little bit more raw. Thank you for bearing with me. I really want to find a sustainable and fun way for me to bring my information to you. So still at this early stage, I'm experimenting and I appreciate your patience. Thank you. Okay, so here's where we left off last time, working from our posterized value study. We mixed a neutral with a complement set, and I was using cadmium orange and a phthalo blue, and of course my white. I'm using titanium white. A dark value, a middle value, and a lighter value. If your posterized study has more values than that, of course you might be using more. So where we ended up after our last video was with a very abstract gestural value block-in design. And now we're going to start adding on temperature decisions on top of this tonal painting. And so to do that, the first thing that we want to do is divide our value scale into not just one row of values, but we're actually going to make an additional row of values that are a warmer temperature than that. So using this same set, I'm going to now take my cadmium orange and I'm going to make a pile of each of these values by dividing these in half and just adding a little bit of orange to them in order to warm them up. And so I'm going to end up with 3 values that are cooler and 3 values that are warmer. So I'm just going to put out some of my cadmium orange. I may need a little bit more as I'm working, but this will get me started. So I'm going to take from my darker value and if you ran out of these pigments, and I certainly did, you can just mix more, and that's why you have this chart here, so you can easily mix the same degree of temperature, whatever your neutral looked like, and be able to match the values that you had mixed previously. So I'm adding a little bit of orange to this, just going to warm it up. I'm going to add even more so it's really obvious in this dark state that I'm working with a warmer neutral. I think I'll go ahead and throw in the rest as well. And so I can see pretty clearly that that is warmer than my other dark value. And so now I have a warm and a cool dark. I'm going to do the same thing with my middle value. I'm going to take a nice chunk of it off, set it aside, and warm it up. I want to make this a little bit more evidently warm. Adding a little bit more. And I could place that next to the other similar value but different temperature. One's warm and one's cool. And moving on to my lightest value, I'll do the same. notice that as we add orange to it, of course, orange being a lighter value than blue, inevitably made it lighter in this dark state. And so my value scale here is more compromised than the clarity of shifts here. And so to counteract that, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of white to my middle value, lighten it so that there's more contrast here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add more white to my lightest light so that there's more contrast here as well. And so here's what your palette should look like. 2 columns and 3 rows. A column of warmer values and a column of cooler values. And now we're ready to get started. First thing I'm going to do is take some of my painting medium on my brush, and I'm going to use one of my lighter values. I'm using my lightest cool value here, making the paint really inky, and using a triangle or a straight edge, I'm just going to go ahead and re-articulate that original grid I had on my page. These guidelines are going to help me as I continue to make new decisions moving forward as we transition into temperature shapes. In the same way that when we were looking at our posterized value study, we were still simplifying shapes into kind of a geometric pattern. When looking now at the full color copy, I want to emphasize that what we're doing in this next stage is not trying to match the colors in this Rubin study, but rather trying to respond to the temperature of the hues. What I mean by that is we're going to be looking at different values of warm and cool, so that wherever the light is touching a surface, we're going to call that warm, whereas wherever a form falls in shadow, we're going to assume that is a cooler value. Of course, there are going to be some interesting rule breakers. For instance, the man's torso in shadow actually looks like a warm shadow, and so I can use one of my warmer, darker values in order to express that different temperature, especially in contrast to that wonderful, rich, cooler, bluish tone of the fabric of the figure next to him. So with the limitation of our palette, only 6 different choices, we're going to be, hopefully, having some fun and dancing around and making equivalent choices based off of the Rubens. Sometimes those choices will coincide with the temperature of the light, the warm light and cool shadows, and sometimes our decisions will make them based off of the richness or contrast of hues we're seeing in the Rubens. But I want to re-emphasize that we are not trying to match the colors in the Rubens. In fact, we cannot. For instance, in my example, that wonderful, rich, lush red cloth that's such an important part of this composition, well, I don't have red on my palette right now, and so I will simply have to translate that into one of my darker or middle value warm tertiaries. And so we begin blocking in, making different choices based off of warm, cool, light, and dark. I'm trying to keep my shapes as simple and geometric as I did in my value study, But I'm also okay with finding new shapes that perhaps I didn't see in my original tonal value study. The most important part here is to have fun. Let your temperatures dance around and find new ways of expressing the contrast in the Rubens using this very limited temperature palette.
And here she is, a nice big pile of voluptuous flesh. Coming soon, part 3, adding in satellite hues. Until next time, thank you for visiting Top Hat Studio Demonstrations with Kimberly Trowbridge.